Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us tonight. I would like to introduce our moderator for this evening, Dr. Amy Offit.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to tonight's webinar. My name's Amy Offit, and I will be your moderator this evening. Tonight's webinar will consist of a 30-minute presentation followed by a 15-minute question and answer period. Please use the Q&A function in your meeting controls to submit questions at any time throughout the presentation. It is my pleasure to introduce our speakers this evening, Bonnie Crater and Nicole Bell. Bonnie is the co-founder and board director of the Center for Lyme Action, a nonprofit dedicated to growing federal funding and developing policy solutions for Lyme and other tick-borne diseases. She is also co-founder and co-chair of Bay Area Lyme Foundation. Nicole is the CEO of Galaxy Diagnostics. She served as the primary author of the State of Lyme Disease Research in the United States and regularly collaborates with the Center for Lyme Action to change the political landscape for Lyme disease and related co-infections. Please welcome Nicole and Bonnie.
Great. Thank you, Amy. I'm going to kick things off and we'll kick it over to Bonnie to take it from there. So thanks everyone for joining us. And quick disclosures, as Dr. Offit already mentioned, I'm the CEO of Galaxy Diagnostics and a past consultant for CLA. Bonnie is also a consultant for CLA and an investor in Vigno Biosciences. So here's our roadmap for the evening, and we're going to start with a quick recap of the paper, which we published in 2023. And then we're going to cover the new findings, basically, that have been released since then, from 2024 to 2026, and really focusing in three areas: diagnosis, the link to chronic conditions, and then treatment. And then Bonnie will close with a legislative update. And by the end of tonight, I want you to have a clear picture of where the science has moved and why it matters for patients. So in 2022, Bonnie approached me about a writing project. So the Center for Lyme Action wanted a comprehensive summary of Lyme research progress, something that could show Congress what private foundation funding had built and make the case for increased federal investments. And so we launched the paper in July of 2023, and the core argument was that Borrelia burgdorferi is the key driver of what researchers are now calling IACI, or infection. And the paper's been used to educate clinicians, patients, and policymakers, and been well received across the ILADS community and beyond. And since its launch, we've heard from you all in the community and from physicians outside it, and also patients and caregivers who have been finding it useful in explaining the complexity of the disease. And so if you haven't seen the paper yet, the original ILADS webinar, we really encourage you to go to the CLA website at centerforlymeaction.org. You can download the paper directly, and you can watch the original webinar, which was hosted by Dr. Jackie Meinhardt. And it runs through the foundational science in more depth than we will have time for tonight. But science doesn't stand still, and neither do we. So at the ILADS annual meeting in November of 2024, we presented an update, kind of adding some of the new research that's emerged since the paper launched. And here we are again, almost 2 years later, with even more to add. So tonight's presentation really focuses on the research published in the last 18 to 24 months. So here's the roadmap for tonight. We'll cover select research from 2024 to 2026, organized into the three different sections: diagnosis, link to chronic conditions, and treatment. And to build this list, we really just reached out directly to the top researchers in the Lyme disease space and asked them, what's the papers that you're the most excited about? And so the result is a curated set, but it's not exhaustive. There's more that's out there, but we wanted to at least provide a representation of the progress that's occurred in the last 2 years. And so we'll start with my favorite area, which is diagnostics. And so, obviously running a diagnostics company, this is an area that's close to my heart, but personal interests aside, it's also where the most urgent failures in the current system concentrate, right? Patients are being missed at the exact moment early treatment could make the greatest difference. And so let's look at what the research is telling us. So this slide really captures the core problem in 3 lines, right? Rash-based diagnosis is less than 50% accurate. The CDC two-tier test misses most early Lyme patients, and then current tests systematically miss certain patient groups. And these aren't fringe claims. They're what the data shows consistently across multiple studies. And the good news is that new solutions are on the horizon. But before we get there, let's start with how broken the current standard really is, because I find that a lot of clinicians still don't fully appreciate the magnitude of the problem. And I want to spend a moment on this slide because it's literally the only one carried directly from the original paper. And I keep it in because the EM rash is still being used with enormous diagnostic weight, and the data just doesn't support that. So here's what the literature tells us, right? Bullseye rash that everyone pictures and associates with Lyme disease, it only about 14% of patients. And actually, in some studies, it's been as low as 6%. And even in those cases, it's still incorrectly diagnosed about 20% of the time. Then the more typical EM rash or atypical EM rashes, they represent about 58% of infections. And those have misdiagnosis rates that even higher, closer to 36%. And then, of course, some patients, about 28%, have no rash at all. And so when you add it all up, more than half of patients, 52%, will be misdiagnosed based upon rash presentation alone. So, for clinicians on this call, many of you will see these patients years after that initial misdiagnosis. And so, the patient who was told no rash, no Lyme really could have been failed decades before they came to your office. And so, for a while now that the standard two-tier test is about as accurate as a coin flip. But this study from Bay Area Lyme actually confirms that it's worse than a coin flip. And so Bay Area Lyme has been collecting patient samples for over a decade, and several of the studies in this section were made possible by their work. And as someone who works in this space, I can say without question, access to these well-characterized samples from the biobank is essential to advancing diagnostic development, and we're super grateful for this resource. And so in this particular study, they looked at 466 early Lyme cases enrolled over a decade, and 253 of those patients had a 3-month follow-up visit. And so the headline is that at the first blood draw, only 23% of patients tested positive. That means 77% of patients were missed. And these patients were in endemic areas, so physicians were treated with antibiotics even when the patients were treated with antibiotics. But here's something that's equally important, is that of the patients who initially tested negative with IgG, only 4% later converted to a positive at the 3-month visit. So early antibiotic treatment prevents the immune response the test is looking for. So if you treat early, which you should, the test may never become positive. And so a negative follow-up draw is not evidence that the patient wasn't infected. Couple of double negatives there, but I think you get the point. And then this paper came out last week, and it's a head-to-head comparison of 4 FDA-cleared Lyme tests, both standard and modified two-tier algorithms, again, using the Bay Area Lyme biobank samples. And the result in early-stage disease, these tests miss between 64 and 78% of patients. And the timing issue is also stark. Within the first week of symptom onset, the majority of patients tested negative on every single algorithm. And so detection only improved after 2 weeks, by which point optimal treatment timing has really passed. So the earlier you test, the less reliable the test is. And so a negative test does not rule out Lyme. And so the conclusion is pretty clear. We need tests that detect the infection directly, not tests that rely upon the patient's immune response. And this finding is from Johns Hopkins and has real implications for patients. And so a prospective study of 243 antibiotic naive adults, all presenting with an EM rash, found pretty significant differences in both testing performance and disease severity based upon sex and menopausal status. So compared to women overall, men were nearly twice as likely to test positive on the two-tier test. They had more severe and they presented with larger rashes. And that gap widens when you compare men specifically to premenopausal women. So men were almost 3 times more likely to test positive, and the symptoms were more than twice as severe. So what this means clinically is that the test is harder to trust in younger women. They mount a less robust immune response during early infection, and the disease looks less dramatic. And as a result, they're more likely to be missed. And this helps explain something we see frequently at Galaxy, where we diagnose women as they approach menopause, not because they were recently infected, but because as their hormone levels change, their symptoms intensify and look more like what you would see in men. And so the underlying infection may have been there for years, but the symptom profile changes, and that helps to drive the diagnosis. And so what's being developed to do better, right? And here we show 2 new approaches with improved performance over the standard. The first is out of research out of NIH, and it uses a redesigned ELISA that requires 2 Borrelia targets to bind simultaneously before calling a positive. And this dual binding requirement reduced false positives while improving sensitivity. And actually 15 out of 15 early cases were accurately diagnosed within the first 7 days of symptoms, compared to 76% with the modified 2-tier test. And this is currently in prospective clinical trials. The second method was developed in InBios, and this screens for antibodies against 9 Borrelia proteins, and then uses the machine learning algorithm to call the result. So multiple weak signals can be combined to give a more confident positive. And in early patients tested within the first 7 days, it improved detection from 10% to 30%. And this is currently in research use only. And so both approaches show that smarter antibody testing design is in the ceiling. And then building on that theme of machine learning and multiplex antibody testing, this is a preprint from Stafford and colleagues at ACES Diagnostics, and takes a similar conceptual approach, but runs on the Luminex platform, which matters because Luminex is already installed in most large reference laboratories. And the test, called Lyme-Seq, looks at antibody responses to 10 Borrelia antigens. And using the Johns Hopkins slice cohort, the results are pretty striking. So 100% sensitivity in early Lyme at diagnosis, 100% sensitivity again at the 3-month post-treatment visit, and 95% sensitivity in PTLDS patients, compared to 43% for the standard 2-tier algorithm in that same group. So, one important caveat that the paper explicitly flags is that a positive test can't distinguish between active and resolved infection with persistent antibodies. It's still an antibody approach, so it addresses the sensitivity, but it doesn't solve that is the person currently infected question. And so, but that said, this is a meaningful step forward, and ACES is currently commercializing the technology and targeting FDA submission in the coming year. And so I want to take a moment to zoom out and talk about the structural effort to push better diagnostics all the way to the market. And so the LymeX Diagnostic Prize is a private-public partnership between the Stephen and Alexandra Cohen Foundation and HHS. It launched in 2022 and has in each phase offered both prize money and structured support to teams that are developing better testing solutions for Lyme disease. And the idea is to create a competitive pipeline, not just fund individual research, but to actively accelerate the development to FDA. And this program is currently in phase 4, which supports teams through FDA submission. There are 7 teams that started the phase, and I'm proud to say that Galaxy is one of can diagnose active infection, not just exposure history, not just antibody evidence of prior response, but active ongoing infection, because this is the gap that's been in the field for decades. And so 2 broad approaches are in development. The first is direct detection, looking for the bacteria itself, either its DNA or specific biomarkers that are in patient samples. And then the second uses patterns of immune response to signal active infection. So one development I want to highlight is that at the end of 2025, Galaxy actually partnered with Dr. Brandon Jutras at Northwestern, and we've both been pursuing a urine antigen-based approach approach, and we're now working together. So Dr. Jutras identified specific bacterial cell wall components as a highly specific marker for active Lyme infection. And we're currently validating this in our lab with plans to release it later this year. And we're working together as part of competition. And so this paper was published last month, and it really explains the science behind why urine is such a compelling sample type for direct detection. So Borrelia produces roughly 38,000 tiny little membrane vesicles per organism in culture over a 10-day period. And these vesicles are small enough to travel throughout the body, including into the nervous system and joints, which helps explain how Borrelia drives widespread inflammation, even when the bacteria are concentrated elsewhere. And so these vesicles are also filtered by the kidneys and excreted in the urine, along with the proteins they contain. And so this particular paper found 289 distinct Borrelia proteins in human urine samples. And so this is the biological justification for urine-based testing. The bacteria shed these vesicles continuously, and the kidneys clear them. And so you can detect the proteins directly without requiring a patient immune response. So now let's shift to another section, which is really critical for practicing clinicians. It's the link between Lyme disease and chronic conditions. So this is where the patients you've been treating for years, right, the ones that came to you after being dismissed elsewhere, this is the science explaining how they got to this state. And so from the 2023 paper, we talked about how Borrelia is not a typical infection. It doesn't infect and leave. It actually disables the immune system from the very start. It leaves debris that drives inflammation long after treatment, and it crosses critical barriers like the blood-brain barrier and the placenta, and it hijacks key immune pathways in ways that we're really only beginning to understand. And so each paper in this section kind of adds a new dimension to that picture, and together they make a compelling case for why so many patients remain sick after standard treatment. This paper from researchers in Vienna is really an elegant piece of mechanistic work that shows why Borrelia is hard for the immune system to fight. So the question is, what happens to the skin's immune cells during a tick bite, like before the bacteria even arrive? So the skin has specialized immune cells called Langerhans cells, and you can think of them as the first alarm system, right? And what the research shows is that tick saliva reprograms these cells before Borrelia even enters the picture. And the saliva shifts them from an alert, fight-ready state into a tolerating stand-down state. And then when Borrelia arrives, the effect is then amplified, and the cells double down on tolerance rather than sounding that immune system alarm. And so the result is that the immune response that should be clearing the infection doesn't mount properly, and the body is primed to tolerate, not to fight. And this helps explain why immune memory to weak and why reinfections are common, and also why some patients really never produce a strong enough antibody response to test positive in the first place. And this is work from Dr. Brandon Jutras's lab at Northwestern, and it's directly relevant to both chronic symptoms and the diagnostic work that we're working on at Galaxy. And so every time Borrelia divides, it sheds roughly 45% of its cell wall into the surrounding environment. And when antibiotics kill the bacteria, particularly the cell wall disrupting ones like amoxicillin and ceftriaxone, there's an even larger burst of cell wall material kind of released all at once. And here's the important distinction that the paper makes is that the cell wall material comes in two forms, smaller fragments and then large intact polymer chains. And so the fragments are cleared from the body pretty quickly, but the intact polymer form isn't. It accumulates in the liver and persists there for weeks. And it's also been found in the joint fluid of post-treatment Lyme arthritis patients. In fact, in 27 of the 30 samples tested after antibiotic treatment. So why does that form matter? Well, because the intact polymer is biologically active in the way that the fragments aren't. So it drives an immune response and cellular changes that parallel what we see in patients with chronic illness following infection. And it's the form that lingers long after treatment ends. And so the team at Northwestern also developed a test in antibodies that can specifically detect the intact polymer and distinguish from the fragments, which has really important diagnostic implications. And so the practical message is when your treated patient remains sick, this may be part of the why. Even if the antibiotics clear the bacteria, the debris can still be there, and not all debris is equal. And this is work from Indiana University and identifying a little unexpected. So Borrelia triggers an immune alarm system that the body normally reserves for viruses. The bacteria secrete a molecule that activates a pathway called STING, which typically responds to viral DNA. And when STING is activated, it triggers the production of type 1 interferons, which are a signaling protein that ramp up that immune response. And early in infection, this is actually helpful, right? It recruits immune cells and reduces the bacterial load. But when that alarm stays on chronically, it shifts from protective to damaging, and persistent interferon activation drives ongoing inflammation and tissue damage. And this is the same pathway being studied pretty intensively in long COVID. And the molecular switches involved, STING and TBK1, are already established as drug targets, which means this opens up a real door for targeted treatment in Lyme, chronic Lyme as well. And this is a review paper from Johns Hopkins, and it makes a pretty straightforward but important point, is that Borrelia has every biological tool needed to cause autonomic dysfunction and POTS, and yet no study has ever formally investigated whether or not it does. And so the paper documents the plausible mechanisms: nervous system involvement, nerve damage, autoimmune responses, disrupted blood-brain barrier function. And every one of these is documented in Lyme, and every one is a known pathway to dysautonomia. Yet it remains unstudied in the PTLDS population, even though effective treatments for POTS are actively being trialed in long COVID patients. And so this paper really calls for that research. And it's also a useful tool to share with colleagues who question whether Lyme can cause the autonomic system, symptoms that your patients describe. And this paper from MIT is probably one of my favorites that we're covering. It asks a question that's genuinely never formally been studied. Does Lyme disease increase risk for gynecological conditions? And the research combined mouse experiments with analysis of 3 massive human health databases, including data from roughly 110 million patients across 30 health systems. And so first in mice, Borrelia was found in the uterus and surrounding tissues within weeks of infection and persisted essentially for the entire lifespan of the animal. And infected mice developed uterine inflammation and cysts. And then in the human data, consistent across all 3 independent databases, women diagnosed with Lyme showed significantly elevated risk of endometriosis, miscarriage, uterine fibroids, heavy periods, painful periods, and uterine polyps. And critically, these conditions developed after the Lyme diagnosis, not before. And the associations held even after controlling for antibiotic use. So for patients with reproductive complications following Lyme, there's now research that supports that this is an issue and not just clinical intuition of the linkage. And while we're on reproductive consequences, this review paper covers something that has been strangely absent from the research agenda. Can Borrelia be transmitted from a mother to a baby? So it's been known since 1985 that Borrelia can cross the placenta, and case reports followed through the 1990s, but then research essentially stopped around 2000. But the documented cases that are summarized in this review article are pretty sobering. Miscarriages, cardiac malformations, stillbirths, early neonatal deaths. Only a handful of the documented cases actually had normal outcomes. In 2026, the WHO added congenital Lyme to its international disease classification system, a formal acknowledgement that this is recognized, but US medical guidelines still really make no recommendation for exposed newborns. And the incidence of perinatal transmission is unknown, but the outcomes are pretty serious. And so for any clinician treating a Lyme positive woman who is either pregnant or planning to become pregnant, this is really a conversation worth having. And now let's get to treatment. So the core problem hasn't changed, that the standard monotherapy fails a meaningful percentage of patients, but new work is beginning to show us where some of the potential solutions lie. And so, standard treatment leaves behind a lot of people. We know this, you all know this. I mean, your patients' lives reflect it. And current therapies fail many patients, leaving them with chronic debilitating symptoms. And so what are needed is new approaches that are proven in controlled clinical trials, not just case series or clinician experience. And the good news is that the research community is finally building that evidence base. And so let's take a look at what's coming. First, the same Bay Area Lyme Biobank study that we looked at in the diagnostic section also has a treatment story. So of the 253 patients with 3-month follow-up data, 22% reported ongoing symptoms after antibiotic treatment. Most commonly, these were joint pain, fatigue, and muscle pain. And of those patients, only 35% went back to see their provider. And so 2/3 of early Lyme patients with persistent symptoms after treatment did not seek additional medical care. And so this is a critical care gap where more physician and patient education is needed. And so the message is that early Lyme is not a one and done encounter, right? These patients deserve a follow-up at 3 months, and persistent symptoms are a clinical signal, not something to dismiss. And this paper out of Tulane appeared in our 2024 ILADS presentation, but it bears repeating here because the finding and has real clinical implications. So the study compared monotherapy versus combination antibiotic regimens in an infected mouse model, specifically checking whether treated mice could still transmit Borrelia to feeding ticks, or known as xenodiagnostics, where you look at the tick to see if there's still Borrelia in the animal. And with every monotherapy tested, and 8 were tested, they left viable transmissible infection found in the ticks that fed on the mice. And then the combination therapies tested, 7 different combinations, cleared it completely with 0 transmission across the board. And so this is animal data, not a human trial, but the signal is consistent, and it supports what many ILADS clinicians have observed clinically, that combination therapy may be what's needed for effective treatment. And this is an exciting treatment paper, out of Northwestern, and the headline's pretty striking, right? A better antibiotic for Lyme might already exist that's FDA approved for other indications. And so this looked at 466 FDA approved compounds at low doses against Borrelia and other bacterial cultures. And the goal was to find a drug that selectively kills Borrelia without broad spectrum collateral damage. And piperacillin emerged as the standout candidate. So in mice, piperacillin cleared Borrelia at a dose 100 times lower than doxycycline. And critically, it had negligible impact on the gut microbiome. So in the charts shown on the right, you can see that the 2 piperacillin groups maintained pretty healthy microbiome diversity, but the doxycycline group showed a radical disruption of the microbiome composition. And so for patients who struggled with the GI consequences of long-term doxy therapy, this matters a lot. So piperacillin is the beta-lactam antibiotic that's used intravenously in hospital settings, and human trials are obviously a great next step, a compelling case that it's worth exploring. And then this is a pilot study from Johns Hopkins, which tested psilocybin-assisted therapy in 20 patients with PTLDS, or post-treatment Lyme disease. So all had CDC-confirmed Lyme disease, and all were experiencing active PTLDS symptoms with a median duration of nearly 6 years. So the protocol was 2 psilocybin sessions over an 8-week program. And the result was general symptom burden dropped 40% from baseline. And that reduction held at the 6-month follow-up. Quality of life scores improved 13%, and improvements were seen across depressive symptoms, sleep, fatigue, and pain. And so this is a small open label pilot with no control group, but a 40% symptom reduction sustained at 6 months in patients who've been sick years on average is pretty notable. And there's also a plausible biological rationale. Psilocybin has shown effects on neural inflammation and immune modulation. Both are relevant to PTLDS. And so this is early stage, but it's worth watching. And then finally, the infrastructure to build the evidence base is coming together. So the Lyme Clinical Trials Network, funded by the Cohen Foundation, and then also has sites funded by Bay Area Lyme and NIH, currently has 7 active studies in enrolling, which are listed here. And multiple institutions, multiple approaches, and real rigor. This is really the infrastructure that the field has needed. And so for patients who qualify and want to contribute, and for clinicians who may want to refer into these studies, these trials are worth knowing about and monitoring for new studies that get added. And so 3 different sections, 3 key takeaways, right? Diagnostics, the current is broken and we have the data to prove it, but better tests are coming. Chronic conditions, the biology of why patients get missed and stay sick is really no longer theoretical. We're beginning to really understand these core mechanisms. And then on treatment, better solutions are in progress, and there's a clinical trials network building to build that evidence base. And so the science is there, and what it needs now is more investment to get it here sooner. And that's exactly where Bonnie picks up. So I will hand the presentation over to her to discuss how CLA operates and how you can get involved.
Great. Thank you, Nicole. I always love hearing you present because I always learn something with all these great slides and all the terrific information. So thank you very much for, one, believing that well, allowing me to convince you to write the paper, and 2, for putting together these presentations on a periodic basis to follow up. Oh, so appreciated. Okay, everyone, this is Center for Lyme Action. We are a 501(c)(4). We started the organization in 2019 because we realized that while the private foundations were doing tremendous amounts of work funding, the private money was just not enough. We really, really needed to leverage the power of the federal government. So that's why we started Center for Lyme Action. And our mission, and Nicole's going to run the slides. She's kind of telepathic with me, so she knew that I was going to say next slide. Our mission is to grow federal funding for Lyme and tick-borne diseases. There's a lot of great work out there, but if we don't have the money, we can't do the work. So this is why we're very focused on the money. Our strategy is that we focused on hiring professional lobbyists. So at Center for Lyme Action, we actually have 2 lobbyists who are, one is Megan Bradshaw. She's our executive director, and she does the most of the work, the lobbying work. She's a registered lobbyist, so there's rules. You have to follow rules, and to talk to the federal government and talk to Congress if so you have to follow the rules and register and make sure that all is kosher. So the other lobbyist, of course, is my brother, Jeff Crater. Jeff brings 40 years of experience on Capitol Hill, and so he is doing less of the active lobbying, but he advises us on all of our strategies. But we leverage our lobbying ability, and this is part of the 501(c)(4) structure that we put together. So a 501(c)(4) is a special nonprofit that is allowed to do unlimited lobbying to the federal government. And so our professional lobbyists, in conjunction with our nearly 10,000 people across the United States, advocate for Lyme and tick-borne disease research in both the legislative and executive branches. It's very important to have a way that you show up. So when we do our meetings with Congress, when we hold meetings together, when we share information, it's very important that when we show up in a way that is consistent. And so we establish these values for Center for Lyme Action to allow us to operate very smoothly, even though we're a pretty large organization in terms of the number of advocates across the country. So our first value is that we're bipartisan. The ticks don't care if you're a Democrat or Republican. They are equal opportunity biters. So, and we need to make friends with everyone. So it doesn't matter. We are bipartisan. Second value is that there are a lot of different points of view, and all of you out there know this, that there's lots of points of view about Lyme and tick-borne diseases. So we want to try to be as inclusive as possible. Our third value is that we recognize that there's a lot of sick people out there. And so we want to operate as in as humane as possible, in a way that allows for people that are very sick to be able to participate. Our fourth value is that we believe in science. We believe that science is going to solve this problem. And it's very encouraging to listen to all the amazing things that are happening, all the recent papers that have been published, which are really taking us on this journey to so we can have better diagnostics and therapies. Okay, we are a member-funded organization, so I want to recognize some organizations, some individuals who are charter members or platinum members and are grantors. So these are the primary people that fund our operation, and without these people, we can't do the work that we do. So it's big thanks to Alex Cohen, the Bay Area Lyme Foundation, Project Lyme, the Fairbairn family, Lori Woods, the Driscoll Family Foundation, and the Alpha Gal Alliance. Okay. I'm happy and pleased to say that we've had terrific results. So since we started in 2019, all the people, the nearly 10,000 people making phone calls, clicking on action items, coming to meetings, talking to members of Congress, learning, talking, convincing. We've convinced Congress to increase Lyme and tick-borne disease funding by over $500 million. So that's a really terrific result. We're now, it's the actual number is actually 625 million is the incremental impact since 2019. So we operate on a fiscal year basis, so with members of Congress. So the most recent appropriations numbers are from FY26. We just held our advocacy day, of course. Some of you may have participated. We really appreciate your participation. And that advocacy day in February was focused on FY27. But FY26 are the latest numbers that we have. So the CDC is now funded at 47.5 million. CDMRP, which is, of course, our favorite research program in DoD, funded at $7 million. And of course, the extremely important research money in NIH is now at 122 million in NIAID. And then the last area, which Nicole talked about eloquently, is LymeX, which is an inspiring next generation diagnostic challenge program, is funded at 5 million in HHS for a total of 181 million. This is a more detailed breakdown. You can see at the bottom, we're comparing FY20 enacted, right, versus FY26 enacted. So we started off at 59 million, now we're at 181 million. And the dark gray numbers are the addition of the light gray numbers. And so you can see the Kagan Tick Act, many of you know about that, which is the legislation that funds a series of programs in the CDC. It's funded at $20 million now. Lyme and tick-borne disease funding for the regular prevention programs is at 27 million. NIH tick-borne diseases, which includes Lyme, is 122. And then you can see the LymeX Accelerator is 5, and then CDMRP is 7 for a total of 181. Next slide. Okay, so many people ask me, okay, so what does all this money get spent on, particularly at the NIH? And it's exciting because we've been able to expand the budget significantly. And this is not me, right? It's not my brother, and it's not Megan. It's literally the nearly 10,000 people that do all this work. This is the result of their work. But it's really exciting is that over the last few years, we've seen funding of chronic Lyme disease projects. In fact, on the next slide, there were 7. Originally, there were 5, and then they expanded it to 7 R01 grants for chronic Lyme disease. And this is the first in history to actually fund this kind of research. And many of you know some of these researchers. I know all of them. They're all amazing, and I'm grateful that they exist on this planet to help us advance the science. But the R01 grants are very, very significant because the awards are a 5-year award. So it's not a 1-year award, it's a 5-year award, and they range between half a million to $1 million a year. So some of these folks might get upwards of $5 million total over 5 years, which is really terrific, and that to pursue a bunch of different projects, which will be meaningful. And hopefully Nicole will come back someday and report on the papers that were published based on this research. Next slide. Another key study that was funded, it's literally the largest NIH prospective study on Lyme disease ever, was funded in 2024. And the lead on that, of course, is Lyndon Hu at Tufts. But it's 6 institutions in the Boston area: Tufts, Northwestern. Well, let's see, Northeastern is in Northwestern is not in the Boston area. But anyway, the main health center, Mass Gen, which of course is part of the Harvard system, and then of course Tufts Medical Health System. So these organizations are working together, uh, and they got this grant of 20.7 million. And the purpose of it is to enroll patients and to shed light on why some acute patients return to health, right, and others develop prolonged symptoms over a year. So this is research that hopefully will shed a lot of light on some of the issues that we really desperately need to understand. Okay, the other great thing that happened recently, and that was in 2024, um, uh, HHS published the National Strategy for Vector-Borne Disease. Now, this thing didn't come out of thin air. It was the result of the Tick-Borne Disease Working Group. So, two people that some of us know pretty well, Dr. Kristen Honey and Dr. Sue Visser at the CDC, they got together with 18 other agencies and put together this vector-borne national strategy. But it was born out of the recommendations, all the reports that were generated by the Tick-Borne Disease Working Group. And so you'll see that there's 5 goals. Number one is we need better understanding. Number two is about diagnostics. Number three is about prevention. Number four is about treatment. And number five is about having tools to promote better public health. So I'm just go back for 1 second. Why this is significant is that the vector-borne national strategy provides a blueprint for all of government, all of federal government. It's really comprehensive and quite good. It's quite long and detailed, but it's quite good as a platform for policy at the federal level for helping us reach our goals. Without a national strategy, it's really hard for agencies to have direction. And this national strategy, of course, is one of the requirements of the Kay-Hagan-Tick Act, which was passed in 2019. So HHS did their job. They produced the national strategy. NIH is doing their work to try to grow federal funding, but we're still not there. We have to continue to do more. But I wanted to ask you guys if you haven't joined us for some of our activities to talk to Congress, it's actually pretty fun, and it's been really effective. So we've raised about $1.4 million, which we would consider our investment to date. And the total return on all appropriations related to Lyme and tick-borne disease was about $1 billion. But the incremental return on that 1.4 million was 625 million, which is a 446x multiple over 5 years and 6 years of operations. So next, I want to just talk a little bit about how we do it. So here's a map. Some of you guys may have seen this, but this is the regular appropriations action and schedule map. So in February, the president's budget comes out. Then there are budget hearings. Then there's meetings, which committees call markups. And there's a vote on the floor. And then there's a conference between the House and the Senate on their individual appropriations bills. And once they have a final bill, they vote on it, and then it gets signed into law by the president. So where we are here. The president was a little late on introducing the budget this year, so it was introduced last month. And we're currently in budget hearings. There was and soon we'll go through the other steps. So this is a regular schedule. Many times it doesn't get adhered to, particularly in the last few years. We've seen the actual approval of the budget get pushed out quite a bit, but over time we have seen success in getting our appropriations request in. And the way we do this is we match our activities with what's going on in the federal government. So in February, we host an advocacy day, sometimes called a fly-in. We then follow up with all those meetings with appropriations requests. So we have a big forms team of 20 people, and they beaver away and send in literally thousands of forms to congressional offices. The members themselves write letters among themselves, and so we encourage other members to sign on to the letters that will help us get increases. And then we write our own letters. To the committee members or to the conferees, and then hopefully at the end we celebrate. Next slide. Okay, so in 2026, in February, just a few months ago, when you click one more time, we held our Advocacy Day, and 338 meetings were held by 487 Lyme and tick-borne disease advocates. We, for the first time, actually for the second time now, we had all 50 states covered. And then our forms team was unbelievable this year. We submitted forms to 475 House and Senate offices. Some of you guys may remember from government or history class that there's 535 offices in Congress. So we covered 475 of them with our appropriations request. So this is the biggest forms filling capability that we've had, and quite an accomplishment. The reason the forms are so important is because if there's no form submitted to the Appropriations Committee with your ask, there is no committee action that's taken. So you have to submit the forms to your congressional office or to your Senate office in order for any action to be taken. And this has really been one of the secrets to our success, is that we're very diligent about filling forms out and making sure that the offices are educated and get get some of them to forward those forms and those requests to the Appropriations Committee. The other really cool thing about the fly-in is that it's really a bridge builder in our Lyme community. We have over 40 independent Lyme organizations that participate in this advocacy day. And so we're excited to have everybody participate when we try to do a good job with training and giving people the roles that they want, or the roles that they feel comfortable with. Okay, next slide. Okay, so we go to Washington, D.C., and this is what we did last year. So I wanted to give you guys a feel for what we did last year in May of 2025. And Nicole is going to play this video, and hopefully the sound will work. There we go.
That's my bad. Hold on.
That's okay. Here you go. Thanks, Nicole. And don't forget to close that out so we don't have another video playing on YouTube. Okay. So please, we're going back again in May. So in a couple of weeks, we'll be there on May 14th. We're going to do a congressional Lyme series. We'll also set up meetings with members of Congress for those of you that want to meet with your members. So we hold an event. It's going to be in the Rayburn buildings, one of the House office buildings. We'll have opening remarks from members of Congress. Nicole's going to do another part of the paper, which is the state of Lyme disease therapeutic research. And then we're going to have Dr. Brian Fallon, of course, from Columbia, to talk about the Clinical Trials Network. And we'll have a reception. There'll be members of Congress there. There'll be staff members there, as well as members of the public. And we hope that you can join us. So next slide. Okay, this is how you can get involved. So first of all, we love having advocates who are patients, but we also love having advocates who are healthcare providers. Healthcare providers and scientists gives a lot. You guys have a lot of extra weight. You bring a wealth of experience, and you can really help us educate Congress. So to get involved, the first thing to do is sign up for our mailing list. It's centerforlymeaction.org. And so scroll down to the bottom, you should get a pop up and just put your email in, and then you'll receive a couple, like one email a month, unless we're in the middle of some active program. Become a member. You can become a member at Center for Lyme Action. We have lots of different levels of membership, but we are a member-funded organization, so anything that you can do to be helpful there is terrific. And then please join us on May 14th for our next congressional series. Meet some senators, meet some members of Congress, and come talk to their staff and help us educate and help us increase federal funding for Lyme and tick-borne disease. And I think that's my last slide. So thank you. You can go to our website and get a copy of the paper. We are working on an update of the paper, and hope to have that available at our event on May 14th. And as a big thank you to iLads, to Jenny and Amy. We really appreciate your partnership and are excited to have this opportunity to talk with everybody today.
Well, Bonnie, thank you. And thank you, Nicole, too. I think both of you are just amazing human beings. And I appreciate you for taking time out of your busy schedules to share with everyone. We had a few questions, but most of them were overlapping. A lot of people wanted to know if they could get a copy of the slides that were shown.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay. I
What's
figured
the best
so,
way
but-
for us to do that? Should we send them to you? We could post them on our website.
Well, that would be good. I would ask Jenny probably if you could send them to Jenny, then maybe she could circulate them as well to everyone who registered for the webinar through iLads. I don't want to over obligate her, but that might be one way that we would have a list. And then someone did ask for opportunities to serve. And I know you just listed the opportunities right there, but I thought I would just throw this out there because I meet people all the time. I actually serve on the PANS Advisory Council for the state of Texas, and I meet people all the time that say, I'd like to help, but I don't know where to start. I don't know what to do. I don't think that that would be something I could do. But then when I'm over at the Capitol here in Texas, like everybody there is just a human being. And I've learned to get past a little bit of that intimidation that comes with being in a place where people have, it seems like, this level of importance that we all sort of revere our government officials. And I just wondered if you had any advice for people who might be on the fence or thinking about, well, that's not something I could do.
Yeah, well,
or shouldn't do.
First of all, the members of Congress, of all stripes, they really, really want to hear from their constituents. They really want to know what you think. And this work that we do helps them a lot because they're able to actually work on the issue that we care about. So if you just remember that that it's their obligation, it's their duty to serve you. That's why we put them in office. Those people consequently really want to hear from you. It's a match made in heaven. You guys have the expertise. You can do it.
Very good. Let me see if I miss any other questions. Somebody said, how do you become an advocate? But I think you answered that as well. Like, just join in, follow along. And
Yeah,
I think you guys do a great job. I've participated in some of your trainings. You do a really good job of that too. I think it's super
thanks, Amy.
helpful. So, last chance for any more questions from the audience. I think that was a really great talk and you crammed a lot into a short time. So, it's really appreciated. I don't think we have any more questions. I think this was probably oriented more. Actually, hold on a second. Actually, one question came across. I had one question on one of the slides. Nicole, when you showed the slide about monotherapy versus combined therapies, I noticed doxycycline wasn't on the monotherapy slide, which I thought was interesting. And then someone asked about hygromycin A, but I don't know if you have any answers for those two questions.
In that particular study, I don't believe that there's been anything recently published on hygromycin A. Bonnie, do you know the status on that?
Yeah, the last information I have on that was that it was very effective in acute Lyme and in mouse studies. But that was the last I heard about that, and I think that was about 2 years ago.
I haven't heard anything in a while either. Someone mentioned that she's disabled and asked what can she do? And I think that's just a reminder of how this can be virtual. But I don't know if you want to speak to that since that was an asked question as well.
Well, certainly we host most of our events on Zoom. Even the meetings that we have with members of Congress, most of it is actually on Zoom. And so we want to encourage participation from everyone. And with our particular community, Zoom seems to be the best way of doing it.
Mm-hmm.
And for those of that it's cost, right? Also, for those that can afford it and are able to come to Washington for certain events, we certainly welcome that as well.
I've done these
Right.
sessions now several years in a row now, and there's often patients on there, sometimes having good days, sometimes having bad days, and everybody really understand. If you just want to be there to support, you don't even have to speak, especially if you're having a rough day. So everybody's really accommodating and helps out. And then if you do have the ability to share your story, we'll work that in. But it's they really do make it very easy for you to participate.
Thank you. Someone asked if this would be recorded, and it will be. I know that already because ILED's recording it, so it'll be available. Someone asked about advocacy for finding a way to get Lyme doctors to be covered by insurance.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Insurance is definitely problematic. And the way we see it is that our best path is to get FDA approved diagnostics, FDA approved therapies, get Medicare approval, and then the private insurance will follow. So we're on a journey.
I think that's a whole 2-hour talk, just that one
Yeah,
question by
exactly.
itself. I have a whole bunch of opinions I'm holding back, but
Yeah.
let's see. Someone said they want to fill out the forms for Congress. Where do they find those forms?
Okay. So, first of all, if you're not on our mailing list, get on our mailing list. You'll be invited to participate in Advocacy Day. Our next one will be in February of 2027. And as part of the form filling, we assemble a forms team. And for our FY27, well, actually at that point it would be FY28 appropriations forms. And we welcome folks to help us because it's really it's a very, very important part of the work that we do.
Very good. Let me just see, make sure I didn't miss anything.
I see something about methylene blue.
Okay. I'm in the Q&A. I wonder if that's in the chat.
Oh,
Hold on a
it's in the
second.
chat, yeah.
Let me look. Do you have any tests using naturopathic remedies like homeopathy as opposed to antibiotics? I know people who have been on several courses of antibiotics and still have chronic symptoms. Do you want me to answer that question?
Yes, please.
So like I've been treating patients for a long time myself, and really there's not a simple therapeutic approach. Like every patient requires like an individualized approach because so many of them don't tolerate certain therapies. They've already tried certain therapies. They have unique symptom complexes. So like I do think homeopathy helps some people. I've never seen it be enough alone to make someone go into remission, but as a complementary therapy, I think it has a place in certain patients. And not every patient in my practice gets antibiotics. Not every patient gets herbals. Not every patient gets IVs. It ends up being like a kind of a start where we start and then navigate through the patient's progress by watching how they respond. And that's really the simplest way of saying how things proceed when something's so complex. So I hope that answers that question. I'm looking to see the methylene blue question too. Is it?
It just says, is methylene blue effective?
Oh, I see it at the bottom. Do you guys want to answer that one? You want me to answer that one? I'm happy to give my opinion.
Yeah, go for it.
I use it in my practice. I don't always use it. Again, it sort of depends on the patient. I have used it in conjunction with itraconazole for Bartonella. Someone did ask that in the chat too. What about other infections? Maybe that might be our last question to you guys after this one. But I do think methylene blue has a place in patients with these conditions, and sometimes it's very helpful and effective with mitochondrial support, with mood issues, and also as an anti-infective. So I'll let you guys answer the question about other infections besides Borrelia.
Yeah, I mean, obviously that's a big issue. I think the paper that we're going over is focused on Lyme, and so that's where the resources are there. I will say, kind of joining us in that Q&A is Dr. Jennifer Miller from Galaxy, and we have put together at Galaxy several different websites. We just recently had one, I think on Wednesday, right, Jen, about Babesia, because we're seeing a lot of emerging Babesia infections, a lot of new species of Babesia that up until recently have really not to be thought of as human infections. And so that could be a whole nother topic. Each, Bartonella, Babesia, those are, could be whole other papers of themselves, and hopefully someday they will be. But I think at least for particular resources on that, we do have some webinars available on the Galaxy website, and use that as a good vehicle and tool to get some additional and late breaking information.
Dr. Miller, do you want to say anything before we close? I think I just noticed it's 7:03. So
no, I would just echo what Nicole said. We have a variety of resources, educational tools on our website about Babesia and Bartonella, as well as some Lyme disease resources.
Thank you.
Amy, I saw one additional question. Are there resources available to help someone having challenges getting on disability? So, uh, uh, disability is covered by Medicare, but oftentimes people have a lot of trouble navigating different states and systems to try to get on Medicare disability. And in this case, it's in California. I do have some resources that are available. Just whoever it is, please send me an email. It's bonnie@centerforlymeaction.org, and I'll send you the information that I have.
Thank you. Well, I think that was amazing. And I'm so grateful that you were both here. We have like a couple more things just to make announcements about. Our next in-person vector-borne illness fundamentals training course is going to take place on Saturday, June 6th in Richmond, Virginia. And our annual scientific conference will be in October. the 22nd through the 25th in Herndon, Virginia, just outside of Washington, D.C. And you can find more information on our ILADS website at ilads.org. If you don't mind, attendees, please take a minute at the end of our broadcast to complete a brief survey of tonight's presentation. And I just want to thank you all for joining us and wish you a good evening. Thanks again.